Hiya friend, it's me Deanna, and welcome to another doll repaint video. Fairy Maid. You saw the thumbnail to this video, so you know that the theme of this doll is a fairy that is a maid. Fairy Maid. Sometimes inspiration comes to us from different places. It could be from books and movies, people in your life, or even from nature. But if you're like me, sometimes inspiration comes to you while you're drifting off to sleep, and you start thinking about the world of fairies. In stories, there are kings and queens of the fae folk like Queen Maeve, and sometimes you might hear about their servants like Puck. But you don't really hear about the lesser fae, the ones who run the domestic show behind the scenes. Well, with that strain of thought, I was no longer tired, and I kept thinking of the idea of a lesser-born fae girl who grew up on the rough fairy streets, but ended up working her way into a viscount's home. There she started as a standard maid, but she ended up gaining the favor of the viscountess and became her lady's maid. Well, after thinking of all that, I just had to make my very own Fairy Maid doll. My plans for this doll got a lot of costume inspiration from shows like Downton Abbey to other classic maid uniforms, with a dash of Gothic Lolita. I'm also going to be working with a couple different mediums I've never worked with before, and I'm really excited to show how all the elements came together from her fairy features to her uniform with you. So with all that being said, enough talking, let's get started. For today's doll, we're going to be transforming this Ghoulia Yelps doll into our Fae Lady-in-Waiting. I chose this doll in particular because of her almost pinched and angular facial features, which to me gives off a kind of haughty attitude that I think resonates well with the upper echelon of Fae attendants. We will be giving her the usual prep today, but there are some bigger things that we have to prepare for this doll, so let's go over the prep steps really quickly. First, we're gonna cut off her hair. Next, we're gonna loosen the hair plugs in boiling hot water. And then we're gonna start pulling them out with my forceps tool. Next, using some pure acetone, we're going to give ourselves a blank canvas by removing the old factory face paint. She has some blemishes that the acetone couldn't take off, but I'm not too worried about these spots because they are luckily in areas where I typically add red pigments. Okay, so now that all of that has been taken care of, the next part of her prep is to start making her look fairy-like by giving her some mothy antennae and pointed ears. To create the base of both features, I'm going to be using wire for armatures that will provide a base that I'll be adding an epoxy clay to. For the antenna, I used 3 strands of wire per side and twisted them together to make them strong but flexible enough to shape into the style of antenna I want. Then for the ears, each ear will have one piece that's bent in half and fed through on each side of the earlobe. Next, I'm going to start sculpting the antenna and ears using an epoxy clay called Milliput, which was suggested to me by fellow doll artist Stitch Witch Creations. They said that they preferred it to epoxy sculpt because it's on the firmer side and less gummy feeling. I personally hate how gummy epoxy sculpt is, so I'm crossing my fingers that I have an easier time with the Milliput. I'm starting with her antennae, and I've gone ahead and pre-bent them into this curved shape, which I'm hoping will give her a kind of subservient and demure demeanor. And the first thing I'm going to do is cover the wire completely and press the clay into the wire as much as possible so that the clay adheres to the wire. Then I'll be adding clay to the ears and shaping them into fairy-like points. I do have to apologize, I somehow managed to shape them almost entirely out of frame, so jumping ahead, I'm using some water to smooth and even out the ears and antennae. And in case you're wondering, so far I'm liking the Milliput. If you're familiar with working with Epoxy Sculpt, I find that it has a lot of similar properties, and I have to agree with Stitch Witch. I think it's less gummy, and I'm finding it easier to work with. While the clay is soft, I'm coming in with a little sculpting tool to make some ridges on the antenna. I looked at a couple different types of insect antenna, and I decided to go with a somewhat simple style because she'll be getting a ruffly headpiece later, and I don't want to make things too busy. We are now in the future, and the clay has fully hardened. I want to try to smooth and even out the clay more, so I've decided to use my Dremel to buff it all out. Full disclosure, I think I used too strong of a grit, and there were some scratch marks left in the ears, even after using some sandpaper to try to smooth it out more. Not the end of the world though, but I'll try experimenting with different grits in the future. Next, I'm painting the antenna black with acrylic paint while making sure to leave some of the little ridges showing. After this dries, the last step will be taking the head and body outside and giving everything 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear sealant to prep the plastic for repainting. Now that all the prep work is done, we can start working on her face up. For her color palette, I've decided to keep her gray skin. This will go with what I have in mind for her wings, but more on that later. Even though she's a fairy and has a fantasy color palette, I still want to give her the zones of undertones that I give my dolls with realistic skin tones. As always, she'll be getting blue, red, and yellow subdermal color zones using soft pastels. If you want to learn more about why I add these undertones, be sure to check out my Medusa remake video. Now that the undercoloring has been added and sealed, we want to make it look like there's skin sitting on top of these colors. So to push these colors back, I'm adding a light gray soft pastel on top, and I'll actually be adding 2 or 3 coats of this color to really make the first layers of color a subtle part of her skin. To go with the moth theme of her wings, I'm going to be spritzing on some watered down acrylic paint in white and gray. This will give her some freckling and blemishes to go with the multicolored fairy wings. Next, we have to give her face some dimension to really make her come alive. So I'll be using the power of contouring and highlighting to push some areas of her face back and to make others come forward. It's that old makeup trick of contouring, and I'm literally applying dark grays to the areas where someone would add contouring makeup to their face, and using light gray to areas where someone would add highlighting makeup. Jumping forward, I've blocked in the shape of her eyes using watercolor pencils, and I'm continuing to add details with my pencils to get the basic shape of her eyes and the details of her lips. Now I'm starting to add the details of her eyes with acrylic paints. Normally, I like to use watercolor details for this step because I find I get better detailing, but unfortunately, the layers of sealant didn't set correctly, so instead of having a papery texture, the plastic of her eyes is really waxy, and I'm just not able to get those fine details with my pencils. This can happen if the temperature or humidity conditions aren't ideal, but hey, this gives us the opportunity to improve our skills using acrylic paints. I'm giving her red pupils to harmonize with the pops of colors that will be in her wings. Plus, I think that it plays well with the whole gothic vibe of her antenna and the maid's uniform. Our fairy maid has a very serious kind of feel to her, but it's all kind of a front that she has to put up in the competitive world she lives in. She's really a big softie once you get to know her. for the last touch, I'm going to apply this iridescent paint to her antennae. Even though I wanted them to be a simple style, I still want to give them a special touch, and this will make them have a red-violet sheen. Okay, so now that we've finished her face up, it's time to give her some hair. Off camera, I made her some hair wefts out of acrylic yarn, and now I have to figure out how I'm going to apply them to her scalp while going around her pointy ears and antennae. It's been a while since I've used yarn wefts for my dolls. It seems like this year I either used nylon hair or I've just had bald dolls. I decided to use yarn wefts this time because applying nylon hair with a rerooting tool would be difficult to use around her sculpted on features. If I apply too much pressure, I could accidentally break those pieces off. The nice thing about yarn hair is that it could either be rerooted or glued on in weft form. And if you don't know, wefts are little strips of hair that have been glued together at the top so they can easily be applied in rows. The only drawback is that these raw glue edges aren't cute, so sometimes you have to get creative to hide them. And I'm definitely going to have to be creative while working around her antennae and pointed ears. Also, I have to say that anytime I have a project that involves using glue and hair, it's always chaos. Pure, sticky, hairy chaos. And I have to tell myself to trust the process a lot while doing it. So all the wefts have been applied and I've let the glue dry completely, and now I'm going to cut her hair into a blunt A-line bob. And on this side, you can see that I was seconds away from cutting her hair in the wrong direction. Phew. Now that I've finished her haircut, the next thing we need to do is depuff her hair. I want her hair to fall into a sleek bob, and her hair is much fluffier than I want it. To fix this, I'm going to wet her hair down, wrap it tightly in plastic, and let it dry overnight. And here she is the next day with her smoothed down hair and her bangs swept back. For her outfit, I'm going for a very classic maid's dress. I'm going to be giving her a Victorian style silhouette with puffy sleeves and a long skirt. And since we're going for that classic maid's outfit, her dress is of course going to be made out of black fabric. And she's also going to be getting one of those ruffly headpiece thingies. To kick things off, I'm starting at her feet and making her some long socks out of this stripy mesh fabric. It would be so scandalous for her to have bare ankles showing, you know. Not proper at all. Now that those scandalous ankles are covered, let's move on to making the bodice of her dress. The bodice will be made up of a couple different pieces. A blouse part, made of the same fabric as the socks, lace trim, a Peter Pan collar, which I fumbled with a lot while attaching it, but fortunately for me, I'm flipping the collar over and ironing it flat. So, bye-bye squiggly seam lines. And before I sew the arms closed, I've added another pop of lace to the sleeve cuffs. Now it's time to create the skirt of the dress by sewing these panels together. One of the things I really like about maid uniforms is the extravagant use of lace and frilly things. I want to throw as much lace and ribbons on as I can, so I've added some trim to the bottom of the dress, and I'm now adding a strip of lace a little bit farther up on the skirt for some decorative flair. Once I'm done adding the lace, I'll attach the skirt to the bodice and close up the back side of the skirt. Now that the dress is done, I can't help but feel that something's missing from the bodice, and I realized that her underblouse needs some buttons. I've dug through my nail charm collection and I found these little black dots that will be perfect for the buttons. And for one final touch to the blouse, I'll be adding this pearl charm to the collar as a little decorative brooch. Next, for her outfit, I'm going to be making her a little apron because no maid's uniform is complete without one. To hem the curve of the apron, I put in a base stitch and I'm gathering it so it'll curl up kind of like a patch pocket. I still need to practice this, but I think it turned out fairly successfully. Now we're gonna add lace on lace on lace to the sides and top of the apron. I've decided to extend the lace on the top so that it can be used as the apron strings. And just to make her apron even more frilly, I'm going to attach this little bow. And now it's time to add the last part of her outfit that will really transform her ensemble into the classic maid's outfit. The little frilly headpiece thingy. While making her apron, I realized that the trim I used would be perfect for her headpiece, and I'm just going to attach it using some glue to make sure it stays in place. So we've given our fairy friend some pointed ears and antennae, but to really turn her into a fairy, we need to give her some wings. And to do that, today I'm going to be embroidering her wings based on this moth. I know that there's some moths and butterflies that are black and white, but since her outfit's already black and white and her hair's black, I want to add some color variation while still harmonizing with her skin tones and her outfit. I've known that I wanted to incorporate embroidery into a doll eventually, so I've had an embroidery kit sitting in my closet for quite a while. Do I know how to embroider? Not really, but I've watched like 2 videos on it, so I'm basically an expert now, right guys? I decided to get a handle on this whole embroidery thing and do the majority of the wings off camera. But for the last one, I wanted to share the process with you guys. I had no idea how long each wing took me, so I decided to time the process with this last wing. Jumping into it, I'm lining and blocking in the basic shapes. This will be a basic guide for me while I fill in the colors using an embroidery technique called needle painting. Needle painting is a way of blending different colors of thread using long and short stitches that creates a painterly or realistic appearance. As I move through this wing, I'll block in different colors, and gradually the wing will be filled in with what hopefully looks like natural-looking color transitions. Some of the needle paintings I've seen are just insane with the amount of details and realism they achieve. I don't expect to be quite at that level, but I'm pretty happy with what I have so far with my first try. I'm not stressing too much over making each wing look perfectly identical to each other, because moth wings aren't perfectly identical in real life. I'm just trying to learn a new skill and have some fun while doing it. And now the last wing is done, and it took just under 6 hours to complete. And man, did I catch up on a lot of TV while I worked on these. So now that all the wings are finished, I'm adding some fabric glue to the back and pressing it in with a spatula to make sure that the threads don't come loose in the future. I'm also adding some felt as a backing to make sure everything looks neat and tidy. Next up, I'm cutting out each individual wing and leaving a margin of embroidery cloth around them so I can add some trim around each piece. I'm using this cord as trim, and this will make the wings look more finished and put together. So I embroidered each part of the wings separately because I wanted to join them later so that they look three-dimensional. I'm now going to be doing that by adding some glue to the lower wing and clipping them together while they dry. So now it's one of the most crucial parts of this process, and that's figuring out how to attach this whole thing to the doll. I've settled on sewing on a pin closure to a piece of felt, which I'll glue onto the back of the wings. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know if this was the best method because it was kind of a pain hooking the pin to the dress, but I got it in the end, and I do like the fact that I can take the wings off if I ever need to. And here is the final look of our little fairy maid. A lot of work went into making this doll, and I'm so happy that I can finally show her to you. I'm really happy with how the wings turned out, and I'm so glad that I finally got to incorporate embroidery into one of my concepts. I probably will add some embroidery elements to future projects, but I might just keep it on the smaller side and not do huge details like I did for her wings. Don't get me wrong, it was a lot of fun, but it just took a lot of time making each part of the wing. Worth it for this doll though, I think. I am over the moon with her outfit. I love the Victorian style puffy sleeves, and it was so much fun adding so many small details into this outfit. I'm kind of a sucker for going over the top with adding little embellishments, so this outfit in particular was a blast for me to make. I'm pretty happy with how her hair turned out, but I definitely need more practice using yarn wefts. Since it was a little while since I last used them, I was a bit out of practice and I struggled a little bit while applying and styling them. For me though, I think practicing and learning how to improve is one of the most fun parts of doll making. So I'm going to take what I learned with this doll and keep pushing and trying to make the next doll even better. So you may have noticed in this video, I always refer to our doll as the Fairy Maid, but I didn't give her a name. I had a hard time naming this doll, so if you want to do me a favor, leave me a comment with name suggestions. You guys are always so creative when it comes to suggesting names, and I can't wait to see your ideas. And while you're down there, if you like this video, be sure to give this video a like, and if you're extra kind, be sure to follow my channel if you aren't already. All of these things will help my channel get visibility, which will help this little channel grow. Okay, our fairy friend and I are gonna go gossip about the Viscountess of the Dashing New Footman, but I'll see you next time with another doll repaint video. Bye!